Hello, everybody. It's Alex here from RPG Site. I'm here to talk about Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen for the PC. Adam's joining me. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you for joining me. So, where to begin on this game? I've been playing this for about a week now. You're going to see a bunch of footage here, which I've captured while I'm playing. No spoilers. It's all just me sort of wandering around the world. And this is a hell of a game. I'd forgotten how good it was, to be honest. And you told me just before we started that you haven't played it, but you have seen pretty much the whole game, right?
Right, yeah, I've never actually played Dragon's Dogma, but I basically watched my roommate kind of play through the entire thing, so I'm familiar with it. But I know it looks pretty great.
Well, so the weird thing about it is, of course, it's a Japanese game. It's from Capcom, but it has a lot in common with Western games. You know, sort of the approach it takes is very Bethesda-esque in that it has a heavily scripted story-based opening where a dragon comes and attacks the village where you live, and the dragon rips your heart out and steals your heart, and that makes you the chosen one, basically. And then it's actually pretty story light. It sends you out into the world. It's a modestly sized world. It's no Skyrim or something, but it still feels quite big. And the way I'd explain it is it's one kingdom. It's not like it's the whole world. But it's got a sense about its scope where it understands what it's trying to do. And it's a really, really cool thing. I mean, so when you watched your roommate play, how familiar were you with the mechanic around the pawns?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's kind of got that like medieval type art style, maybe less like gothic than something like Dark Souls, but
Yes.
yeah, like more medieval, less gothic. But the Dark Souls, which is mostly on pattern recognition and kind of that action RPG. Dragon's Dogma has these pawns, and then that kind of brings in this element of like pawn coordination and things like that, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, basically, in the truest RPG tradition, you're building out a party, and most of the time, I played a sort of a knighty type. Later on, I switched to a mystic knight who has a sword and a shield, but can do certain spells with the shield to protect yourself. It's not like you can cast a fire spell, but what you can do is enchant your sword with a fire spell. And then you have 3 pawns. Now, one of those is the main pawn. So that is a second character that you create from scratch. And I chose to create a girl who was like a ranger type. Like, she had a bow and arrow, and she also had twin daggers. And these fit into what they call vocations, which is essentially jobs in the most typical RPG way. And yeah, so she was really good at getting up in things' faces and crawling all over things and jumping on them and hanging off them. And then I typically pulled in 2 mages, and the other 2 pawns you can pull in. You don't have to. You can just roll around the 2 of you if you want. But the other 2 that you bring in are, if there are sufficient, obviously playing pre-launch there weren't too many, but they're going to be from other people. So the idea is your main pawn goes off into the internet, and somebody else, if they want a ranger, can summon in mine, and likewise I'm bringing in other people's to help me. And then they've got that crazy knowledge based thing. So do you know that, like the learning?
I'm actually not very familiar with this.
So the idea is, if a pawn does a quest, it learns about that quest. If it fights a particular type of monster, it learns about that monster. So the idea is, when you fight a troll, your pawn learns how to tackle them, learns that they're weak in the eyes or around the tusks or whatever. And then when they go off into another person's world, if they face a troll and they haven't faced a troll before, and they have my pawn with them, she will pipe up and say, "This is how you do it." I had moments where I was stuck on a quest and I wasn't sure where to go, and one of the pawns that was with me had obviously done that quest with another player and said, "This way, follow me," and started running off in a particular direction. So they learn as they go, basically, and so does yours. And it's not just what you do on your own. Like, my pawn went off. This all happens in the background, so it's not like when my pawn's away, it disappears from my game. But it's like you go to an inn and you save and you sleep, and then when you wake up, it says your pawn has come back from adventures and has bought some items and has learned X, Y, and Z. And that's really, really damn, it's damn cool stuff.
That sounds pretty damn cool.
It's perhaps underutilized, and you got to remember, obviously, this was a 2013 or 2011 or 2012 game. I know Dark Arisen, which was the expansion, which included the original game, which is included here, was a 2013 thing. I'm not sure when the original was, if that was 12 or 11. So it's obviously aged in that regard. You know, things like the HUD and all that stuff doesn't look like current stuff does. You know, there's been lessons learned since then. But it's a really fun game. You know, it's got obviously the crawling mechanic where you fight massive colossal beasts and you can jump onto them and press the right trigger to hold onto them. So then if you fight a creature with 3 heads, you will, you know, want to try and cut off each head individually by clinging on, and that will gradually weaken it. And that feels really good. And also, I have to say, this game has a hell of a soundtrack. And when you're fighting something massive, the really triumphant music that plays. And, you know, you're sort of clinging onto the head of some griffin or something, and it's flying around, it's thrashing its neck from side to side, trying to throw you off. And you're clinging on, and the music is amazing. It feels pretty fucking good.
Okay, 2 things. First of all, in terms of like world structure, you said this wasn't like really open world, at least not to the same extent like something like The Witcher is, right? From what I recall, it's got more like temple areas or dungeon areas type.
Yeah, well, what I mean, it's definitely open world. It's just in terms of size, it's not that ridiculous, huge, over the top thing. It's much more manageable. It's sort of like the comparison I can give is if you think of, I don't know how familiar you are with these games, but people watching will hopefully be. If you think of like Ocarina of Time, and then think about Twilight Princess, and think about the size difference between those two. Think about how Twilight Princess is just absolutely massive and sprawling, and it's almost hard to remember where everything is in that world. And Ocarina of Time is, you know, much more condensed. Obviously, this game is as big as Twilight Princess, but the point is, if Skyrim is something like your Twilight Princess size, comparatively speaking, this is more like your Ocarina of Time size, where it's like you get to know quite quickly. You know, 10 hours into the game, if you do a fair share of exploring, you will have seen most, not all, of the world. But then, yeah, there's a lot of hidden caves. Like, I was discovering extra caves and stuff that I'd missed very late in the game. And there's a lot to do, you know. I mean, I'm going to quickly bring up Steam while I'm talking to you and see. Yeah, I mean, in the time I've been reviewing this game, I've put in a good, 45 hours. So it's a very big game. It's just perhaps not, it's not as big as some people would expect from a release now. But obviously, it is a game that's now several years old. To be fair to it.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention, of course, I remember when I was watching this game, especially in like crowded areas or where there's lots of enemies. On the console version, the PS3 version specifically, there was a lot of frame rate issues. So I think that's a big question: is how does the PC port compare?
Yeah, and the good news is this is certainly it's a good PC port, and I don't just mean that in the sense that it runs well, but I mean that in the sense that, for instance, you know, I think people were quite annoyed with the ports of the Final Fantasy 13 games because they were quite lazy. They ran well enough, but they didn't have many settings. But they've added a lot of settings to this. You know, you have settings for obviously resolution and refresh rate. They straight up give you the choice. It's like, do you want 30 frames per second? Do you want 60 frames per second? Or do you want variable? And if you pick 30 or 60, it'll obviously strive to hit that at all times. And if it drops, which is nice. You've got VSync. You've got various anti-aliasing settings, HDR settings, stuff for shadow quality and texture detail. My understanding of texture is they haven't made new HD textures, but on 360 and on PS3 they weren't using textures of the full quality that they created, so now you can have the original full quality ones. And they're not going to look as good as textures now, but they look a hell of a lot better than anything did on the PS3 or the 360. Now, as far as frame rate goes, I tested this on 2 different machines. The footage I'm going to use for this is actually going to be from a more modest rig, which has a 770 series NVIDIA card, and that's like my living room gaming PC that I use when I want to sit on the couch and play a game, which is, I think, the best setting with a controller for Dragon's Dogma. And it ran well in that setup. You know, that's not the greatest setup in the world, but it ran pretty much consistently locked at 60 with everything on maximum. And the only time it really dropped is if something really crazy was going on, and then it might drop to like 55 or something. And then obviously, you know, during the strain of recording, that drop would become a bit more frequent. But even then, it was incredibly solid frame rate wise, I found. It runs really well. I mean, some people did ask on Twitter about unconventional resolutions and stuff like that, like 21:9 and things. Those sadly aren't as supported. Hopefully mods can sort that out, but you know, it runs like a dream at 1080p, which is obviously higher than it ran on 360 and PS3 anyway.
Yeah, and it seems like that performance was, you know, the main thing that people, you know, were dissatisfied with on the consoles. So.
Yeah, because I played this back then, and I felt like it was like a 7 out of 10 game, because I think although it had a lot of brilliant ideas, a lot of it was strangled by the performance. Now things are quite different in that when the game's running at this full speed, you can really appreciate how crazy some of those massive battles are when they're running at 60, or even if you're going to play this on a lesser computer, you're going to play it on a laptop or something and it's going to run at 30. The difference between this running locked at 30 versus the PS3 where it would drop to like 15, 20 frames.
The PS3 version easily dropped down to the sub 20, and not even occasionally. It was pretty readily it would do that. I
think you would have to have a real rough PC to not be able to run this in some regard at 30 locked. And if you've got anything that's like suitable, if you've been playing, you know, anything recent, if you've been playing Fallout 4, which has very modest requirements, you're going to be able to run this. Even if you're running Fallout on lower settings, you're going to be able to run this very well indeed, which you'd expect for an older game. But you know, this also feels like a carefully optimized port, and it feels like they maybe changed one. Like an option that I don't know was there in the original is, you know, the pawns can be quite chatty.
Yes, I remember in the original game when I was watching my roommate play it, they would oftentimes yell "harpies" or whatever.
Yeah.
Whenever they fought harpies, every single time.
Yeah, wolves hunting packs is I think the other one, and
oh yeah, that too.
And yeah, but I don't know if it was there in the original, or if they added this for Dark Arisen, or if they didn't, and this is new for this version of the game. But there's actually an option to like just turn pawn chatter off, and the small things like that really do make a difference.
I agree.
And it runs really well. You know, I think inevitably there'll probably be a bit of a backlash about there not being as many options for unconventional resolutions and things like that. But as far as I'm concerned, you know, I put 50 hours into it. I thought it looked great. I thought it performed brilliantly. Even on that older PC that was running an i5 and a 770. It's obviously got all the Dark Arisen content, which adds a lot to the post-game. But I do have a small nitpick here, which is that they did some DLC for the console version, even for Dark Arisen, that basically gave you extra items and things like that. And those items, because they were DLC, you didn't find them anywhere. They were just dropped into your inventory at the start of the game. Because this includes all the DLC, you get all those items at the start of the game, which means it gives you some okay armor, but it also gives you, for instance, a set of armor that's kind of crappy that is worth 360,000 gold. Which in the early game means you can just sort of sell that and be sorted for buying whatever you want early on. And there's, you know, I wish they'd perhaps distributed that content around the game a bit better. But the way everything, you know, the way everything else has been integrated, all the achievements have become Steam achievements, of course. There's friend list for all the pawn stuff. You know, it all just works really, really well. And I can't emphasize enough how I feel like perhaps strangled by performance, this game was a hidden gem last generation and may actually be one of the best one of the really better Japanese RPGs that came out of the last console generation, and maybe now people will be able to appreciate that a lot better. Just because the structure of this game, there's a lot of choice. They seem to be experimenting with things that Western RPGs were doing, so you do have a very vague, very loosely executed romance mechanic, and you have quests that just sort of pick up out of nowhere, and you have vaguely branching stories where characters can live or die depending on what you do. At one point, mild spoilers. At one point, you go to meet the queen, basically, of the land you're in, privately in her room because she wants to talk to you about something, and then the king comes up and you hide, and for various reasons the king sort of attacks her, and you actually have the choice of just staying hidden or walking up to the king. And then the nice thing is it doesn't give you a binary choice in a text box either. It puts you in control, and he's basically strangling her, and you can see it, and you're hidden behind sort of a barrier in the room, like a dressing, I forget what you would call them, but like one of the things that people would have to dress behind or get changed behind.
I know what you mean. Yep.
And yeah, you're just standing there, and you have the option of walking out there or not, and things will certainly, in large ways, change based on that. And yeah, the game's
that's
really
kind of
cool.
that's kind of one of those things that you don't expect from. It's like one of those choices integrated into the actual gameplay, and rather than just like you said, a dialogue, choose A or choose B. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's really nice. I think this is an excellent game. I think I'm not 100% what the I'm gonna check what the price point is for this, but I think as I just checked, it's $30, and I think that's a fine price for an RPG this excellent. And I really, really, really do hope now that perhaps if this does well on Steam, if this can sell, a couple of 100,000 copies on Steam or something, that it will help push Capcom towards continuing this series, because it does feel very unique in the landscape, in the weird mix of East and West it has, and even its commitment to the medieval trappings. It's like Elder Scrolls or Witcher have medieval trappings, but characters still talk in quite contemporary ways, whereas everybody in this does talk in that sort of old English. And little things like the personality of, there's more than one dragon, but the personalities of the dragon you sort of have. There's the main dragon is kind of philosophical and all about fate and destiny, and then you sort of at one point you can encounter a dragon who has a much more flippant attitude and sort of has the sort of attitude, a sort of cavalier Sonic the Hedgehog style attitude and voice, which is very different to the gravelly voiced one that you have otherwise faced. I really like the way that's all constructed. I think this is a great game. There will obviously be a text review on the site. My intention, score-wise, I'm still pondering that, but as of this recording, but it's going to be a good score because this is a really, really great game.
Yeah, so I know they put it out on PS Plus way back when, and I think a lot of people got to, at least try it out if they had a PlayStation 3. You got to try it out, and maybe seeing how if they like the game there, this is just a better version in all ways. So
it's become a cult classic, and I think for a good reason. And what I really hope now is, I do think part of the reason it was probably a cult classic, partially I think because I don't think Capcom truly know how to market a game like this. It's very outside everything that they would usually do. But second, is that no matter how good the concept behind the game is, if the performance is this grim, there's not much you can do. And the performance was fairly grim on the PS4. It was on the PS3 rather. It was a big open world, and there was a lot going on. And a lot of the game is very fast moving as well. Like when you've got these giant creatures dashing about, I can see why it caused so many performance problems, but that is not an issue here. And as soon as you remove that issue, this becomes a really easy game to recommend for anybody who enjoys action-based RPGs. And I also think interesting because if you're a fan more of Japanese-style RPGs and the way they do things with their systems, and just sort of smaller tonal things, This is one of those, but it's very heavily Western influenced. The best way I can describe it is it's sort of like, I feel like perhaps the team that made this almost had what they'd done with Dead Rising in mind when they made it. Where Dead Rising is this weird meeting of Resident Evil and some more Western values mashed together to make this more fluid playing action game. And that's exactly what this is. Except,
and then Capcom has they have Dragon's Dogma Online in Japan, which
yeah,
I believe has gotten at least decent reception over there. I know the trailers looked great anyway, so you have to wonder if maybe that's kind of their thought, like if that could possibly have any success here, and maybe depending on how this does, how the Dragon's Dogma port does, who knows?
I'm curious about that, and I hope they bring that over. But my real hope coming out of this is truly that we get a straight up Dragon's Dogma 2. Because I think with the modern technology and with the way server and online stuff has progressed, you could do a lot more with the pawn mechanic.
Yeah, without making it fully, massive multiplayer online. So
yeah, and of course with the modern consoles, you could do a hell of a lot more with. This game has some ambitious stuff around. In the late game, there's dragons destroying huge pieces of level geometry and things like that, and obviously that's the kind of thing that would improve drastically in a sequel. So I really hope they do one, and I think the best way to encourage that is to tell everybody, if you're an RPG fan, unless you're really not into these action-based games, you really owe it to yourself to give this game a go. You give it a try, especially at that price point, because it's excellent. It's a hell of a way to start the year, I'll put it that way. Like I went into this, I remember playing the original, but I remember thinking it was so-so, and this version of this game has truly converted me into one of those Dragon's Dogma cultists.
Yeah, I know a few of those. So
yeah. So yeah, to wrap up, it is. Do you have anything else to ask? Anything else you're curious about?
I don't think so. You touched on most everything, and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's really nice to have this as the first review of the year for me. It's been a real pleasure to get stuck into it, and I honestly had no idea. Like when I opened up Steam earlier and said, "Oh, I've spent like 50 hours," I had no idea it was that high, 45, 50 hours, because it just doesn't feel that way, which is of course the sign of a great game, I guess. So yeah, review is on the site, so you'll be able to read that once this is live, and yeah, go and check out this game. It's really, really good. Right, so yeah, thank you for joining me, man.
Yep, thank you.
So I will speak to you soon for another game, no doubt. Thanks for listening, everybody. See ya.
Take care.
Our business here is finished.